so that we have everybody.
So I guess I'll call the Board of Zoning Appeals meeting for December 17th, 2020 to order.
Margy, would you like to do the roll call for us, please?
Yep. Board Member Olson?
Yes.
We have Olson, we have Board Member Dortzweiler.
Okay.
We have Board Member Miles. Not look like it. Board Member Rada. I don't know if it's me or if anyone else is having technical difficulties. I'm not hearing everybody.
Yeah, I think some people need to mute. I'm getting a lot of feedback.
If you are not speaking, please mute until you need to speak. I can control everything from here as the moderator, but I find that when we do these kind of meetings where we have a lot of people, it's easiest if people just kind of control their own mute button. That way, if they need to speak, they can do so. But yeah, I agree that if we all stay muted, it'll help with some of the feedback and maybe we can hear each other a little bit better.
Looks like Board Member Miles is present. She's just muted right now. Madison, I don't know if you can hear us. And I see Board Member Sharp.
Yep, I'm good to go.
But I don't see Board Member, thank you. I don't see Board Member Rada.
Yeah, and I'm on here too. I can't figure this thing out.
We can hear you. Thank you.
Madison, are you able to see anything?
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I can't hear you guys. I can see you guys.
We can hear you. We just, let's see.
Okay, I can hear Dustin now. I think it's connected.
Okay.
Can you hear me, Madison?
So did we get through our roll call, or who did we?
It looks like we didn't have Board Member Rada, but I think that might be him that's joined. That's just marked as Rick. Board Member Rada, are you present? Yes. Okay. It looks like that's him on the call. So it looks like we have all 5 board members present on the call.
Okay. So then.
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Yes. All right. So then we're going to request confirmation that the Kansas Open Meeting Act has been provided.
Yes, I can confirm.
Okay. So then we need approval of the minutes from the October 15th, 2020 meeting.
I move that we approve the minutes from the October 15th, 2020 meeting.
I'll second that.
Okay, so been moved and seconded. All in favor? Let's do this as a roll call. Margy, can you call out each name?
Yes, I can. Board Member Dortzweiler.
Aye.
Madison, board member, can we hear you?
Margy, you're cutting out. I can't hear you.
Okay. Dustin, do you want to call roll and I'll call in differently?
Sure. All right. So we have Madison. I think that's who we were waiting on. Were you able to hear us, Madison? And are you able to respond?
Yes. Yes,
Okay. How did you choose to vote on the minutes?
I approve.
Okay, great. Let's see. Rick, what is your vote on the minutes?
Approve.
Okay. Sharp?
Approve.
Let's see. Dorsweiler? I think you were one of them. You were the second or the first?
I second, and I already voted to approve my vote to approve.
Okay. So I'm going through here. Is there anybody we missed?
I approve, and I didn't hear my name called.
Okay. Olson, you approve. Okay. So that means it's unanimous there. Great. I think we're ready for item 3.1 then.
Okay, so application V20-6 filed by Emmanuel Church, question of variance to section 42-5174. So can we hear from staff?
Yes, I'll be presenting this particular report. I'm going to try to get a screen share up here. All right, I think everybody can see the screen there. So the first item that we're dealing with is a sign size variance for the Emmanuel Church, which is located on East Cloud, just east of Dillon's at the Cloud and Ohio intersection. So here on the screen where I'm pointing my cursor is the church property. The church, this property and this development dates back to May of 1990, at which time the church applied for a conditional use permit to have a church in an R1 single family zoning district. The property is owned R1 and churches are not permitted uses, but are rather conditional uses. So they applied for a conditional use permit. At that time, there was discussion and it was decided and determined by the commission at the time to postpone consideration of that particular conditional use permit meeting to May 15th. And the reason that that meeting was postponed is there was concern from several of the planning commissioners about the elevation drawings that were proposed by the church. I got some more people I'm admitting here as I'm talking. Okay. All right. So then on May 15th of 1990, the church or the commission reviewed the new proposed elevation drawings, and once again they postponed consideration of the application. And they did so because of three major concerns. The first major concern was the scale of the building. They were proposing the church was a 200-foot long by 90-foot wide building with a white pitched roof in an open, undeveloped area. And the planning commission was trying to visualize how this magnitude of a metal building of this size would look with that particular color scheme and how it would conform and blend in with the surrounding neighborhood. The second major concern was the church would set the tone for that development over in that corner. Because it was primarily undeveloped at the time, they wanted to make sure that whatever was approved there would conform with the potential commercial development to the west and the residential R1 single family development to the east. Then the third concern was the appearance of the proposed church building compared to other church buildings along the Ohio Street corridor. So that was the third concern. And so with that, they postponed that particular meeting to continue at the June 5th, 1990 meeting. And at that particular meeting, the commission voted 6-0 to approve the application. And they gave 3 reasons for that. The first is that the church's revised architectural proposal featured a brick treatment that was applied to the south, west, and east sides of the building with a bronze roof instead of the white roof, and that they concluded that that design would not injure or dominate the surrounding neighborhood. The second conclusion or reason for approving the proposed conditional use permit was that based on the revised elevation drawings, the church's appearance would be more compatible with the other buildings in the area and other churches along the South Ohio Street corridor. And the third finding is that a church in this location should serve as a good buffer between the eventual commercial development and the residential areas to the east. So then we jump forward 20 years to June 5th of 2010, and Luminous Neon submitted a sign permit application for a new sign above the main entrance, which faces the parking lot on the south side of the building. And that particular wall sign was for a 189 square foot sign, which exceeded 32 square feet in size, which is the maximum in the R1 zoning district. Staff could not approve that particular sign permit and gave the following options as to why they could not approve the sign permit when they were denying it. Number one was the first option that they had was to reduce the size of the wall sign to 32 square feet, which is the maximum in the R1 district. The second option was to apply to the Board of Zoning Appeals for a maximum sign size variance. And the third was to apply to change the zoning of the property to a commercial zoning classification with less restrictive sign limitations. Staff discouraged the filing of the sign variance application due to the magnitude of the variance, which at the time was over 5 times the maximum size that's permitted, and the fact that the Cloud Street property is not unique compared to other church properties that we find around the city of Salina. And so what the church did at the time is they chose to apply to rezone the property from R1 to C3, which is the commercial district that is in the area at the corner closer to Ohio, and would allow for the size of sign that they were requesting at the time. And at that, so then what happened is the Planning Commission had a hearing for them in September of that year to consider the rezoning, and at that particular hearing, the Planning Commission voted 7-0 to recommend denial of the request. And what they did with that recommended denial is they suggested to staff that staff work with church representatives to find a way to modify the sign and the design of the sign so that it fits within the 32 square foot maximum that is permitted. And what ended up happening was the church ended up with a generic church or a tree, artistic tree, which is an artistic mural, and then a smaller sign that describes their name underneath it. So they have a 32 square foot sign combined with an artistic mural that faces South Street. So that brings us to today and the nature of today's request. And the church is again looking to add signage to their property. In this particular case, what they're wanting to do is add a 150 square foot illuminated wall sign on the west side of the building that faces Ohio. So the 150 square feet exceeds the 32 square foot maximum, and that's going to be the topic of our discussion today. So when we look at the zoning of the property, I'll pull up the zoning map here so everybody can see it. And the yellow area that you see is the R1 single family, and the pink area is the C3 commercial that is to the west. And so if we zoom out a little bit, you can get a context of the neighborhood and the Ohio corridor. And so the church here is kind of on the edge of this major residential area that's to the east, and it serves as a land use buffer between the commercial, that's the pink, and those residential houses further to the east. So that's kind of the nature of the current situation with the church, is it's primarily a buffer between the commercial activities and things that are happening on Ohio and the residential neighborhoods that are further to the east of Cloud there. When we look at the uniqueness of the proposed sign, which I'll get graphics of that as well. So this is a survey of the property. Here is what is existing. So they have a cross, which is exempt from our sign criteria because it's a religious symbol. And then we have what's being proposed, a day and night shot here. And so what you'll see on this top image here is what's being proposed. This is the 150 square foot sign. And when we look at the uniqueness of the property, the need for a variance must be caused by a condition which is unique to the property in question and not shared by other properties in the area. And so the applicant to that states that they have a large property that was built on the edge of a residential area, and it is not embedded in the neighborhood, but was rather on the edge. Unique to the church are the community meals they serve that benefit the community. The applicant also states that putting signage on the west side of their building would attract or be seen by transportation, people driving by or using the bus further to the east on Ohio, or further to the west on Ohio. And the church serves 200 meals a week, and this meets a need in the community. And the church also hosts a farmer's market for the Salina community every Tuesday evening. And the church also hosts a large veteran celebration, a free donut day for teachers, and a free oil change event for the community every year. The applicant also states that the church hosts multiple community organizations throughout the year, which makes them unique to Salina based on the volume of their hosting. Staff would note that the need for a variance is supposed to relate to unique qualities of the physical property itself and not the unique qualities of how the property is used or how a particular use operates. In this case, there are several churches within the Salina community that provide similar outreach services as the Emmanuel Church, with some of these churches being located in a similar residential neighborhoods along the Ohio Street corridor. To staff's knowledge, there are no other residential zone churches along the Ohio Street corridor or anywhere in the city that has a sign that exceeds 32 square feet. Because community outreach and service is a common mission of many churches, and this mission has nothing to do with the unique qualities of the property, staff does not believe that the applicant has provided sufficient justification as to how the Emmanuel Church location and property is unique or disadvantaged compared to other churches located in similar residential neighborhoods along the Ohio Street corridor. And what staff has done, and you'll see in your packet, is we have done a sign study that shows all of with pictures of all of the different signs along the Ohio corridor from Republic down to Belmont. And we also created a spreadsheet that helps highlight some of that. And I will try to display that on the screen as well. And so here is that particular spreadsheet. It's got over 100 some different signs on it. And what we've done is we've tried to highlight signs that might be a good comparative for the commission when they're thinking, or for the board as they're thinking about this. There are two churches along this corridor of Ohio that could be a comparative. One is the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, which has a 16 square foot wall sign that faces Ohio. Another, and is just a little bit north of this, is the First Church of the Nazarene, which also has a sign. It's a ground sign, and that is 32 square feet. It's a 4x8 ground sign. So both of the churches that are within this area stick to the 32 square foot limitation, and staff isn't aware of any other church within Salina that exceeds that's in a residentially zoned area. Now, as we go through the spreadsheet, there's only a few that even match or exceed the 150 square feet that are being proposed. One is the Sunflower Bank. They can see on the sign here, they do have a pole sign the combined signage on the pole is 196 square feet. And Dillon's had one. I think Wendy's had one. Did I pass Wendy's? So yeah, Wendy's has 192 square feet, so they exceed the 150. And then the only other one that I could find that was of that magnitude was the main wall sign on Dillon's. So of the 100 and some signs that we have along the corridor, 3 of them match or exceed the proposed 150 square feet, and all of those are commercial entities that are located directly on Ohio. So when we look at the adverse effects on the neighbors, the applicant states that the proposed wall sign will not impact neighbors on the west or south side of their church building. There is no housing on the west side where the church is proposing to erect the wall sign. Only the Dillon's parking lot, which they say is very brightly lit and is a commercial property. And the applicant states that the Dillon's grocery store will easily outshine the proposed LED channel letters and the name that are being proposed. The applicant believes that their proposed wall sign is simple and tasteful and will not scroll or flash, as it will be a static sign. Staff would agree that it is hard to argue that a 150 square foot illuminated sign located on the west side of the church building would negatively impact the neighbors to the east, as the sign would not be visible to them. Additionally, adjacent properties to the north and south will all be over 250 feet away from the proposed sign, so that distance will help mitigate any negative impacts that sign may have. However, staff would point out that the church was originally approved in this location in 1991 and was approved to act as a transition buffer between the anticipated commercial uses that are now at Meadow Point and the grocery store for Dillon's and the residential neighborhoods to the east. The reason the previous 2010 rezoning request was not approved was because the Planning Commission wanted to preserve the church property as a transition buffer between the commercial uses and the residential properties to the east. Staff believes that approving the requested sign variance today would essentially be treating the church as if it's a commercial property, which could undermine the purpose of the R1 zoning and negatively affect the neighbors by eroding the buffering effect the church currently has between the commercial properties to the west and the residential neighborhood to the east. It is not uncommon for property owners to want signs that are taller or larger than the sign code allows in an effort to increase community visibility and attract more patrons. One of the main reasons for having sign regulations is to create a level playing field for property owners and establish reasonable sign standards that every similar situated property is subject to. Staff's biggest concern with approving a wall sign that is over 4 times the amount of what's permitted is that it might set a precedent and could undermine even-handed enforcement of the sign regulations and undermine the intent behind allowing churches in residential zoning districts and not just restricting them to commercial zoning districts. When we look at the unnecessary hardship, the applicant states that the wall sign is a wayfinding sign, and so that preventing them from having a sign of this size is keeping the community from easily seeing their property from one of the busiest intersections in Salina. And I'll pull up a graphic that was provided. So here on the screen is the applicant's photograph of the sign if it were to be restricted to the 32 square feet. And here is the sign of what it would look like if the 150 square feet were allowed. So this is kind of the comparison. And the applicant states that a smaller sign cannot be seen from Ohio and not be visible through the trees placed in front of Dillon's on Cloud Street, and that based on the United States Sign Council visibility chart, the church's proposed wall sign is appropriate for the distance and traffic conditions, as the church is approximately 900 feet from Ohio Street. So staff would agree that a 32 square foot wall sign would be difficult to read from Ohio Street, but that is because Emmanuel Church is located nearly 900 feet from Ohio Street. Staff believes that approving a sign size variance for a property just because it is located too far away from a major corridor for a typical 32 square foot sign to be seen could set an unfavorable precedent that encourages future sign size variance requests for properties located near but not on arterial streets. So the applicant believes that the R1 zoning district inhibits the full use of the development of this property compared to similarly situated properties by limiting the maximum size of the wall sign to 32 square feet. Staff would reiterate that the vast majority of churches and schools in Salina are subject to the R1 32 square foot limitation, and that we are unaware of any that exceed the 32 square foot limitation. Staff believes it is difficult to claim that the particular church site is unique or has been unfairly singled out or treated differently with a 32 square foot maximum, especially since the church has been in operation at this location for almost 30 years. Looking at the effects of the public health, safety, and welfare, the applicant states that the proposed wall sign will not affect traffic, property values, or other neighboring properties. Staff would agree that the proposed 150 square foot wall sign would have a minimal direct effect on the public health, safety, and welfare of the surrounding area. The proposed sign will not obstruct visibility of any intersection or affect traffic. The greatest potential impact to the general public that the proposed sign would have would be indirect, as approval of the requested sign variance could undermine the enforcement of the sign regulations as to maximum sign sizes, which would be contrary to the public welfare. The general public could adversely be affected if the variance were to create a precedent for other properties located similar distances from major streets that want greater visibility. In looking at conformance with the general spirit and intent of the ordinance, the purpose for limiting the size and height limitations of signs in the R1 district is to minimize the visual impact on neighboring properties and maintain a smaller scale of development. The maximum sign size in the R1 district is limited to 32 square feet in order to allow sufficient sign area to identify the church to pedestrians and vehicles of the adjacent street while minimizing the visual impact on adjacent properties. In the case of sign variances, and when we're dealing with sign codes, we also have the First Amendment and equal protection issues that come into play. In this case, a sign regulation, it is even more important to treat similar situated properties equally and even-handedly, especially religious institutions, such as the Emmanuel Church. The applicant reiterates that the proposed wall sign will not affect traffic, property values, or the use of the neighboring property. The applicant believes that the size of the proposed wall sign stays within the general spirit of the code and conforms to the residential neighborhood because the wall sign faces west towards a large and busy commercial property that was constructed after the church was built. Staff would note that all variances are contrary to the letter of the governing zoning ordinances. The issue is whether the variance is contrary to the general spirit and intent of the ordinance. Again, the intent of limiting sign sizes is to create a level playing field for property owners and to establish uniform sign maximums for all property owners to conform with. While the proposed wall sign might be similar in size to some of the signs at Dillon's, the proposed wall sign is not in keeping with the general spirit and intent of preserving the residential character of residential districts by limiting wall signs in residential zoning districts to 32 square feet. So as such, Emmanuel Church is essentially asking to be treated as a commercial property instead of a residentially zoned church. Staff is usually very careful and not supportive of granting sign size variances because of the concern of setting a negative precedent for future requests and the concern about the outbreak of sign wars where each business or organization requests to have their sign taller or larger than their neighbors. Staff and previous boards and commissions have always strived to maintain a level playing field for sign sizes and sign heights. Singling one residential property out for special consideration could result in a precedent for other residential locations unless the board makes adequate findings relating to the uniqueness of the Emmanuel Church compared to other locations and the hardship that could result if the R1 zoning district limitations were applied to Emmanuel Church. So on page 13 of your report, we do have a summary of staff suggested findings, which reiterate a lot of what we talked about in our report. And we do have a few conclusions we'd like to share. And number one is that a variance should only be granted when there is uniqueness and unnecessary hardship. Unnecessary hardship means that a reasonable use of the property cannot be made without the variance. It's hard for staff to see that reasonable use of the Emmanuel Church property could not be achieved with a 32 square foot wall sign, especially since they have been in this location for almost 30 years. It is also not the function of the Board of Zoning Appeals to issue or to use the granting of a variance as a tool for economic development or to enhance a competitive advantage for a particular business organization. These are the functions of the economic development organization and the property owners themselves. The role of this particular board is to apply the ordinance fairly for the betterment of the overall community. And number three, as to the uniqueness and undue hardship, these factors have nothing to do with the nature of an organization or the use of the property and how they use it or intend to use it. What uniqueness and undue hardship relate to is the physical condition of the property. How is the particular site disadvantaged by its size, shape, topography, etc.? The burden is on the applicant to demonstrate this uniqueness and hardship. So we do have a number of alternatives here. One, you could approve the 118 square foot sign variance as requested, which would allow the church to erect the 150 square foot sign on the west side of their building. The board could also approve a lesser sign variance than what's being requested by the church. The board could postpone action if they feel additional information is needed, or the board could deny the applicant's request if the findings of fact that are necessary to approve the request cannot be made. Staff is concerned that approval of this sign variance could set a precedent for other properties near but not directly on arterial corridors unless clear findings of uniqueness and hardship can be made in this case. And staff is unable to support the approval of the variance application and will recommend the fourth alternative, which would be to deny the request. If the board wishes to approve the application under either alternative 1 or 2 listed on page 14 of your report, staff would need to work with the board to develop alternative findings in support of granting relief from the strict application of the R1 regulations of this church, which limit their sign maximum to 32 square feet. So with that, the staff would take any questions from the board. Any
questions for staff from the board? Okay, if not, then can we hear from the applicant or the applicant's representative? And when the applicant or representative comes on, please state your name and address.
I don't know that you guys can see me. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay. I apologize. Just can't see me. That's what I get for. I'm Jeremy Hopkins, and I am trying to sign, and I'm representing the manual.
You may want to turn your speaker down.
Karen is also on the screen. I can see
Excuse me.
her. And she also
Sir?
have an opportunity to
Sir? Sir?
Okay, it's one or the other of us.
Mr. Hopkins,
then,
you're breaking up quite a bit.
be dead.
Sir? 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 Dustin, what's his name?
Yeah, Mr. Hopkins, Eli Hopkins is what it's showing up
Eli?
as.
Eli?
This is Margy. We might need to have him
Yes.
restart his audio.
Yes.
Eli?
I'm gonna try and move this, fellas, and see if it works.
Dustin, can you send him a chat
Yeah.
or a message to, if he's on his phone, he needs to turn off the speaker on his computer?
I'll work on that.
We might even need to have him leave the meeting and rejoin.
Is there
Okay,
another?
he's gonna go ahead.
I was going to ask if there were any other representatives for the applicant in the meeting that could. Deb is there, I see. You go ahead and unmute yourself and speak, Deb, if you would.
Okay. Hey, thanks everybody for letting us talk. Hopefully Jeremy can hop back on and kind of give you more of what he was going to talk about. I just want to come at this from just a personal angle and what kind of sparked this whole thing. I know you've heard a lot of history. We weren't here at the time. I'm Deb Herron. I'm a worship pastor at Emmanuel, and my husband's the lead pastor. And we've come in and replaced Lauren and Erie Holtberg, who started the church and moved to that location 30 years ago. Basically, when we came here, I'm a native of Salina, and we moved back after being gone 33 years. And when I came back and I met up with multiple people that have lived in Salina all these years, I told them what we were doing, and they said, well, where's the church? And I said, well, it's next to Dylan's. And they didn't even know that that building was a church, let alone Emmanuel. And so it really had me concerned and made me think, well, why is that? And so as I began to investigate, I realized you can't really see a lot of the building from the trees, and Dylan's having grown up and having a gas port and all that. And it just caused us to think, well, maybe we should have something that people can see a little bit better. And so that's kind of what started this whole thing. And then just even realizing the impact of what some better signage or wayfinding sign would do for the church. you know, I think we are unique. We house and host so many events and have touched the community. I mean, thousands of people have been reached by Emmanuel, and I want to keep it that way. And we really minister to so many people from all different walks of life. We minister to a lot of people that are mentally disabled, mentally challenged, and mentally ill. And of course, they're the people many times that don't have money readily to have an iPhone to get maps to be able to find us. They have to just go by word of mouth or, you know, some kind of instruction. And so to be able to get off of public transport and be able to look and see us and see a sign, it would help immensely. That's who we feed on our Saturday nights, although we're not doing that, of course, right now because of COVID. We're actually delivering meals now, but we hope to go back to that. So it would be just an incredible visual for us to have some signage that can be seen on the west side of the building that would probably be eclipsed many times by Dylan's. Dylan's is so big, it's so bright, it's so active. It would almost take that size on the west side of our building to be able to be seen. We just want to do our job. We just want to do our job the best to our ability. I think being that buffer that Dustin was talking about, we're the building that buffers between commercial and residential, which, by the way, we don't want to be commercial. That they tried that years ago, and that's not what we want to do. But being that buffer, as Dustin said, I think it would be a nice balance to be able to just have some nice size signage on the west, again, the west side of the building, and yet the front of our building looks very normal. It's very compliant. And we just don't look like a church. We don't have the stained glass. We don't have a steeple. We don't have crosses out in front of it. So again, signage is extremely helpful for any business. And in some ways, church is a business, but, and I think any church should be able to have proper signage, to be able to be seen, to be able to be found by people as they're looking for a church. I think hopefully Justin's on. He's able to speak now. He can explain a little bit more, but I really appreciate you. I hope that you take in consideration just the different things that I've said and what Dustin will be saying. So I'll sign off now and let him speak. Thank you. Thank you all very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Dustin, do we have somebody else?
Yeah, can you this is Barry Hopkins again? Can you hear me?
No, we cannot.
Hear me?
You are breaking up considerably.
Go ahead, Deb.
Sorry, I just received some information from Justin, kind of his notes, if I would be allowed.
Sure, go ahead.
Go ahead, Deb.
I hope I can read it. I think, you know, from what I can read within the law, I know you guys have, you have these ordinances to keep people safe. I'm sorry, that noise is distracting me. To keep people safe, to keep, again, on a level playing field.
Deb, hold on one second.
Sure.
So anybody that has their speaker unmute or unmuted, mute it right now so that we only have one person talking at this point in time and we eliminate the background noise. Go ahead, Deb.
Thanks. He says here, he just wants to let everybody know that, you know, we are really not trying to have a competitive advantage. I want to be very clear on that. The church in Salina is one body, one group, we are one people and we're trying to do a common thing. I could care less if any church in Salina has a big sign. And personally, Mormons, the Mormon church and the Nazarene church, they're right there in Ohio. They don't need a big sign. They can be seen very clearly. But you look at Covenant easily should have a huge sign. I didn't even know what that building was when I came to Salina. To be able to have a beautiful sign on their building to be seen would be extremely, I think, beneficial for them. I think too that he wanted to, from what I can read from his notes, we're not creating any kind of hardship by having this sign. I don't feel at all. If anything, we're helping with people who are in the middle of hardship and able to find this. So let me just see. He's texting me what he's wanting to get across. And maybe no other churches have signs because they've never requested it. Maybe they didn't feel like they needed it. Again, we set off of a main road, and a lot of churches you'll see are kind of right on streets. They're right on, you can drive right by it and see it. I'm trying to read his notes. I'm so sorry. Basically, he's saying also, a lot of things have changed since 1991. And I believe that was something Dustin had cited. You cited the church being there Well, if you look at the property, huge changes. Dillon's was not there. There was a lot of those businesses were not even around there. And so we're just kind of this little church set back a little bit, and all we're wanting is to really be seen a little bit better, to have people find us a little easier. He wants to know if he can try again. Is that possible?
Sure.
Okay. I just sent him that message. I don't know what needs to happen.
Everybody please accept me. And then maybe you can hear me.
No, we still can't hear.
Can't hear me.
If you have another device that's on in that area.
All right. Well.
If you have another device that's on in the area.
No, I just yelled at everybody I could find to yell at.
Well, I can hear you now.
Can you hear me plainly?
Now I can't hear you again. It sounds like you're getting feedback into.
Please don't hold this against the church.
Yeah, that's not going to work.
Internet.
Do we have anybody else?
Okay, I surrender. Please repeat. Okay.
Yeah, this isn't working for this gentleman.
And it looks like it sounds like it's very delayed.
Yes. Because I'm hearing myself coming back over his. Do we have, Dustin, is there anybody else for the applicant in the audience?
I can't tell who. I mean, we have several people in the audience.
Okay.
I don't know if anyone else is wanting to speak on this particular issue. If so, raise your virtual hand and maybe I can call on you. Do you know, Deb, if there's anybody else from your organization that was planning on being in this meeting, or were you and Justin the only ones?
Me and Justin were the only ones. And is it even possible to table this and do something with it next month?
Yeah, I mean, that's an option that the board has if they choose to do that.
Okay. So let's go ahead and go to the board. Is there any questions for Deb at this point in time? Okay. Thoughts on this?
I think before we get into deliberation with the board, we want to give everyone another chance. If anybody has some public opinions or thoughts that they want to share from the public, just to make sure that we aren't missing somebody. I'm not
Right.
seeing anybody, but I'd really like to give everyone a chance to speak if they need to.
Yeah, I would too. And I would tell you that at least for the board at this point in time, because we did have somebody that wanted to speak, and since we could not hear that individual, I would be in favor at this point of postponing this to another time so that we have an opportunity to hear everybody clearly at this point in time. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'm with you on that, John.
Okay.
Oh, I was just curious as a board member if the individual that's having technological difficulties was going to say anything different than what Deb had already said.
Go ahead, Deb.
Yes, he was. I think it would be advantageous for you to hear it.
Okay. Any other thoughts?
Well, I'm anticipating that our next meeting would be via Zoom. So my only concern is if we're having technical difficulties now, would we have them then in the future as well?
And it's a good point. I mean, it very well could, because if he uses the same apparatus, same location, it very well could be that we have the exact same thing coming on. However, we could have the opportunity that he could be where his Deb is at, and it would work through also. Again, if that's what we want to do, then we would need to make a motion to postpone this to another time. If everybody feels like, based on the information that they have from staff and what we have heard so far, then we could move forward also with the current application. So thoughts? We would need, if we want to postpone, we'd need a motion for that. If we don't want to postpone and we want to move forward on the application today, then we would need to move forward with that process. So Steve, are you in favor of continuing on?
I believe everybody who wants to talk should get a fair chance, although I think I actually have enough information as a board member to cast my vote. But I guess I would move that we table this till our next board meeting, this subject matter, so that Eli can have a chance to speak to the board.
Okay, so is that a motion then?
That is a motion.
Okay, do we have a second?
Yeah, I'll second that motion.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second to table this to our next board meeting. To Dustin, when is the next board meeting?
It would be in January, and I think we have it in the last report there, what the specific date would be. I'll try to find it for you.
Dean, it should be Thursday, January 21st.
Okay.
So, yeah, the motion should postpone consideration to a date certain, and so that date would be Thursday, January 21st, 2021.
Okay, so Steve, that is your motion?
Yeah, that's my motion to postpone to the January 21st, I believe, board meeting.
Yes. Cal, do you still have
Only
a second?
for the purpose of public comment, I guess.
Yeah, yes, I still second that motion.
Okay, so we have a first and a second. Can we take a roll call on that then?
Steve Dortzweiler, aye.
Okay. John Olson, aye.
Gil Sharp, aye.
Richard Rada, aye.
We have Madison, Dustin. Dustin, do we have Madison?
Last I saw, she was on, but I haven't heard from her.
Does she need to be
It's an aye for me.
there she is.
Thank you, Madison. Okay. So that moves us to item 3.2, which is application V20-7 filed by Call Valley Engineering on behalf of JTS Investments LLC and their tenant, Kansas Department of Health and Environment. And I guess actually before we get started on hearing from staff, we need to make sure that we have applicant or representative of the applicant available.
Yes, this is Justin Owens. I'm with Call Valley Engineering, and we also have Chris, who is with SBA, on as well.
Okay, thank you. So can we hear from staff then?
Yeah, I'll be presenting this report as well, and so I will share the screen here so we can pull up the location of the proposed area and the details of what the nature of the request is. So the particular property that we're dealing with on this request is located on Enterprise Drive, and pull this over. So it's a vacant property that KDHE is looking to develop here. The zoning of this particular property is C6 heavy industrial, with the area closer to Schilling being C5. So I'll turn on that zoning layer so you can get some context. So along Schilling, we have C5 zoning, and then Enterprise Drive, where this particular property is located, is a dead-end street that has a cul-de-sac at the end with a large detention basin that we'll get into in more detail later. I'll just kind of zoom in on that just so you can see there. And the reason I bring that up early in this particular report is because it's really the crux of the issue when we're talking about why we're looking at a parking variance, and that's what we're looking at. So the Bland subdivision, which this is a replat of, the replat was approved by the Planning Commission in August of 2003, and it is a replat of the Bland edition, which was originally platted in 1987. And out in this particular area, we are very sensitive to flooding considerations. Now, a lot of that has been improved when the Schilling road ditch was constructed in 1993. Along with that Schilling road ditch, there were also a number of improvements that were made in this subdivision, which one is the pond way to the south. And there are easements, drainage easements along the backs of the lots within the Bland subdivision here along the common property line between the KDHE property and the Lowe's Home Improvement Store. And that drainage easement is to allow water to drain from the site and go down to the detention pond, where it is eventually pumped out and sent to our wider stormwater system. So the nature of the request is KDHE is actually developing the site for a new regional office building. For a new office building, and the office building, because it's a regional office, will have 33 employees, 6 state-owned vehicles, and they would like to have space for additional visitors. Well, the requirements in this particular C6 district for offices is that you have to have 1 parking space for every 300 square feet of every 300 square feet of office area. So here's what's being proposed. And the additional paving that the KDHE is proposing is shown in red, and that will increase stormwater runoff. Well, the zoning code, along with minimum parking requirements, also has maximum parking limitations. And these maximum parking limitations are set in place so that sites don't overpave or oversurface and create additional flooding and flood hazards and potential issues for neighboring properties. And so the site that KDHE is looking to develop would exceed the maximum allowed parking, because the maximum allowed parking is 25% or 125% of the required parking. And so they're going to be exceeding the allowable parking that they can have. And so that's the nature of the request, is they're asking for relief from that particular limitation. So the maximum amount of parking that the KDHE site can have is 29 spaces, or the required amount is 29 spaces. The maximum they can have is 36. They're proposing 45, which is 9 more parking spaces than what's allowed. So when you look at the adverse effects on the neighbors, the applicant states that the increased stormwater runoff from the additional paving can be decreased with an optional rain garden located just east of the north parking area. And by providing an adequate number of parking stalls on the site, the developer wishes to ensure that the visitors of the KDHE building will not need to go looking for parking on adjacent properties. The properties to the north and east are currently vacant lots that are undeveloped. And the Enterprise Drive dead-end street prohibits on-street parking, so there's not a lot of opportunities for shared parking on the surrounding properties. And one concern that staff would have, and that the applicant also has, is that by restricting the off-street parking on this particular site to the maximum amount, that there would be insufficient parking for the site, and that it would invite overflow parking to occur on the Sign House property, which is to the south and is the only adjacent property that currently has off-street parking or areas where people could park. And so in other words, not approving the requested off-street parking variance could have more negative impacts on the neighbors than approving the off-street parking variance would, particularly the Sign House property that is located to the south. Staff's main concern with additional impervious surfacing is that you could be creating additional stormwater runoff, which would result from the expanded parking lot, and how that could impact the neighbors. With the flat terrain, stormwater runoff is a sensitive issue, and replacing green space with additional impervious surface area could have negative impacts. Now, a properly designed rain garden should help mitigate the impacts of additional stormwater runoff generated by the increased impervious surface area, and that's what the applicant is proposing, as shown in the blue area on the site plan, on the proposed site plan. So while I'm showing my cursor, there's a blue hashed out area. There's a fairly substantial landscape area at that particular location on the site, and the applicant is proposing to design an optional rain garden that would help detain water that would be a result from the increased impervious surface areas. Looking at unnecessary hardship, the applicant argues that strict application of the off-street parking limitations will not allow for sufficient parking for employees, state vehicles, and visitors. So they have 33 employees. The state vehicles, they have 6 of those that need to be parked there when they are not out in the field being used by employees. and they'd like to have room for visitors, as this is a regional office in which they will have business conducted with outside parties. And so with that, there is not adequate on-street parking in the area due to the cul-de-sac, fire hydrants, and the no parking zones along Enterprise Drive. Staff agrees that if KDHE's parking variance were denied, there would not be enough parking spaces to meet their need of 45 spaces. Because the KDHE site appears to be large enough to provide 45 off-street parking spaces, along with the rain garden stormwater detention system to detain the additional stormwater runoff, not approving the requested variance could cause an unnecessary hardship, leaving KDHE with insufficient parking. When looking at the effect on public health, safety, and welfare, the applicant states that the increased runoff from additional paving can be decreased with an optional rain garden just east of the north parking area, which I've shown and is on the screen here in the blue. Staff would agree that it is the increase in site runoff that could have the largest impact on the surrounding properties and the public, and that an on-site storm detention system would help mitigate that negative impact on the existing storm drainage system in the subdivision as well as the surrounding properties. Looking at the conformity with the general spirit and intent of the ordinance, the applicant states that the proposed 45 stalls are necessary for KDHE to run their operations, and that stalls will be occupied the majority of the time during business hours. They also point out that the 9 extra stalls increase the C-value coefficient by 0.03, and increased runoff can be handled with a rain garden. So what you'll see on the site plan here is the red shaded areas. That is the additional pavement that is being proposed as part of this application. And what the applicant states is that that increased impervious area would increase the runoff coefficient by 0.03, which the proposed rain garden could handle. Staff would point out that the intent of the off-street parking regulations in the zoning ordinance is to promote public health, safety, and general welfare by establishing a minimum number of parking stalls, and so that we aren't congesting our right-of-ways or impacting adjacent properties that might have off-street parking. On the other hand, the limits on having maximum number of parking spaces are there to prevent the overbuilding of parking and increased impervious surface areas, which by limiting that could mitigate future flooding and drainage problems that we experience from time to time in Salina. So after reviewing the proposed plan, staff has confirmed that while the applicant is proposing to exceed the maximum allowed number of on-site parking spaces, 45 instead of the maximum 36, the KDHE site also exceeds the minimum requirement for front yard landscaping area. As you can see here on the site plan, the entire area that is between the parking lot and Enterprise is all green space and landscape area, which is about 1.5 times of what they would be required to have. So they do have significantly more landscaping than what is required. Staff would point out that we have had a couple of somewhat recent cases that have come before the Board of Zoning Appeals for similar variances for parking to allow those entities to exceed the maximum amount. They're both restaurants. One was the Arby's restaurant down on South 9th, and the other is the Olive Garden, which is right next to it, also on South 9th. Those happened in 2012 for the Olive Garden, in 2017 for the Arby's, and in both of those cases, the Board of Zoning Appeals voted unanimously to approve the requested parking variances, finding that the sites were unique compared to other restaurant locations because there was no shared or overflow parking in the vicinity, and that the additional paving and parking spaces would not have an adverse effect on neighboring properties or public safety and health, because additional stormwater runoff resulting from the additional paving would be detained on the Sutherland Addition property, which has a large detention pond on it. So in both of those cases, they had a detention pond dedicated to handling the additional water runoff. In this case, the applicant is proposing a rain garden to help supplement the detention that we have in the drainage pond that's to the south of this subdivision at the end of Enterprise Drive. So staff does have a summary of suggested findings on page 8, and we also have some alternatives on page 9. And with alternative 1 being you could approve the requested off-street parking variance if you can find that the required findings of fact can be made to approve it. And the board could postpone consideration of this application if additional information is needed. And the board could deny the applicant's request if the findings of fact cannot be made. Staff would agree that the KDHE office is a standalone, freestanding operation with no opportunity for shared parking arrangements in the surrounding area to meet their operation needs, and that the site is large enough to provide for the 45 off-street parking spaces that they're wanting, along with adequate detention if a adequate rain garden is designed by the engineering team representing this application. Staff would recommend approval of the applicant's variance request with a couple of conditions. One is that the applicant shall work to design and construct an adequate on-site stormwater detention system, such as the rain garden that's being proposed, that will ensure the development of this site as proposed will not have any negative impacts on the surrounding properties or the existing public drainage system. The second condition would be that development of the KDHE site shall substantially conform with the plans presented and approved to the board. So with that, staff would take any questions that the board may have. And we can also go over any of the visuals that are in the packet or that have been shown in this presentation.
Any questions for staff? Okay, if not, then can we hear from the applicant or the applicant's representative? And for the applicant or the representative, please state your name and address.
This is Justin Owens with Call Valley Engineering. All right, my address is 2928 Jack Circle in Salina. I think staff has done a good job to show that, kind of state our case that the parking, we've shown that it is a need. There is very limited parking. Without the parking, it definitely would be an issue with people parking where they're not supposed to. It's going to be hard, nearly impossible to try to enforce that. Also, I would like to point out, when we originally put this together, we weren't sure on the exact location of a rain garden, but they are actually in the process of installing the landscape out there, and they have put in a rain garden, which will actually be right on the east edge of the parking lot, right off the parking stalls. So water running right off the parking lot will go into this area, and it winds up being nearly double the amount of storage that we would need. As Dustin said, the 0.3 increase in C value equates to about a 3% increase in runoff, and we've calculated that to be about 913 gallons of water, and we've got nearly double that amount of storage available with what they've installed to this point. And just appreciate your consideration in this. And I don't know, Chris, do you have anything to add?
I don't have anything to add other than I appreciate the consideration and thank the staff for their hard work on this, and I'm willing to answer any questions that any of the respective board members have to ask at this time.
Any questions from board? So Justin, I have a quick question for you. So on the runoff, so if we're looking at what Dustin currently has on the screen, on the top part in the red where the additional concrete is, so the runoff coming into that water garden, is how much of that parking area is going to be draining into that compared to coming down to the south and then going over to the easement to the west of this property?
Talking about the paved area on the north side, or that there that does
Right, that's the additional paving that's going to be going into that. So is that, how much of that area in through there is going to be directed towards that garden, and how much of the rest of it's going to be going down to the south and then back over to the west to the other detention?
I would say probably on that, it's not, you're going to have a situation where most of the parking lot is directed to it, so it'll fill to the point that it'll overflow, and then it'll go on down to the east into the road, and then down or into the storm sewer system and into the detention pond. So I'd say the majority of that would get towards that, whether just depends on the amount of rain, how much of it will fill it in and then start to overflow. So initial rain there will be little runoff off the parking lot until it's full, and then it'll start to overtop, and it'll work its way through the grass lawn and then out to the street.
Okay, so currently everything's going to drain towards the street and then to the south to the detention pond then.
Right, everything, and that was part of the whole scheme of and that was the requirements, was everything had to drain to the east, because that's how the whole system's designed to capture everything from the street. So the whole site is graded from west to east.
Okay. Any other questions from the board?
One thing I didn't make really clear, because I was trying to do too many things at once, is this is what is currently approved. So they do have an approved site plan. Okay. And you can see how it's a little bit different, where we don't have as much paving on the north or on the west here. And the striping is laid out a little bit different, where it's not as tight, because they have some of these radiuses here. So this is what's currently been approved. This is what's currently been constructed by KDHE. And so what they're asking for is the additional paving that's allowed in the red areas. And what we are suggesting with this variance application is that if we were to approve this variance, that we would have an adequate design to capture the additional runoff from that additional paving.
Dustin, I have a question that may be directed to you or to Justin Owens, but what becomes of the trash enclosure if the parking lot is expanded on the west?
Yes, what we've worked with KDHE is that they don't necessarily need a large trash enclosure like what was shown. So the agreement, or the idea was, instead of a trash enclosure, that they would only need a cart service, and if that needs to be screened, they could put in a fenced area back behind the building, so that cart, they could just roll that out whenever trash service comes out. So it's not necessary to have such a large trash enclosure.
Thank you.
Okay. If there's no other questions for applicant, then we would take questions or comments from interested citizens. Dustin, do you see anybody raising their hand?
I'm not seeing anybody.
Okay. Then I would say discussion with the board. Comments from the board or discussion? To me, this one's pretty simple. I don't see that there's an issue with the additional parking spots, because this is going to be contained within this lot for their own employees and for the accessory cars. Think that it's been handled well with the parking and the drain, with the water garden to the front to be able to handle flow, to slow it down before it hits the street. So I wouldn't have a concern with it.
I'll go ahead and make the motion that we approve the parking variance as long as we include the staff's recommendations that the applicant work to design and construct it so that the stormwater waste or wastewater flows into the detention pond, and that it conforms with all the plans presented and approved by the board.
I'll second that motion.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second. So can we do a roll call?
Steve Dortzweiler, aye.
John Olson, aye.
Gail Sharp, aye.
Richard Rada, aye.
Madison Miles, aye.
Okay, so we have a motion and it's been approved for application V20-7. So we are on to application number AP20-1, which is filed, and I'm not sure of the pronunciation of the last name, but appealing the zoning administrator's determination that the construction of a garage addition facing Deborah Drive on the west side of the house that has an existing 2-car attached garage on the north side by the house for Eastmore Drive. So with that, first off, do we have the applicant or representative for applicant in the meeting?
Yes.
We're here.
Okay, so with that, can we have a presentation by staff?
Mr. Andrews gonna make that presentation, but before I start, I noticed in the meeting present is Benjamin Kraft, and I would like to introduce the other board members to Benjamin, who is a student and is a youth representative that was recently appointed to the board, and this is his first meeting, and his first meeting is by Zoom. So we do want to welcome Benjamin, although we haven't welcomed him in person.
Welcome, Benjamin.
Good to have you, Ben.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Okay, you will notice on our standard application page that the application says application for variance or appeal. And probably the vast majority of the cases that come before this board are for variances. But you actually have another power or duty as the Board of Zoning Appeals. And in the zoning ordinance, it states that the board shall have the power to hear and decide appeals where it is alleged that there is an error in any order, requirement, decision, or determination made by the zoning administrator in the enforcement of the zoning regulations. The board may reverse or may modify any order, requirement, decision, or determination made by the zoning administrator, and that to that end shall have all the powers of the administrative official from whom the appeal is taken. So the reason for this application coming before the board is that Mr. Blacklinger is appealing a determination that I made as the zoning administrator that his proposal to construct a garage on the west side of his house facing Deborah Drive is a second garage and not an addition to a 2-car garage, making a 3-car garage. And so this associated with the application is a 2-page form that's attached to the application, and it sets out the procedure for processing an appeal of a zoning decision or interpretation. And so we have an application. We have scheduled this for a hearing. Notice has been published of this hearing. We provided written notice to neighboring property owners of this hearing. we have presented you with a staff report and all the materials supporting that, and those materials provided by the applicant. And so we'll have a summary, a presentation by the zoning administrator, comments from the applicant, comments by interested citizens, and then Board of Zoning Appeals discussion and action. A property owner's appeal may only be granted upon an affirmative vote of a majority of the members present and voting. The quorum of the board is 4, and a failure to receive the required number of votes will result in denial of the appeal. So you have the background there that we're in the Holiday Resort Edition, which is at the very northeast corner of the community, south of Country Club Road in the vicinity of Holmes Road. And that particular development as a subdivision was reviewed and approved by the Salina City Commission in 1993. And it was primarily to allow for construction of a nursing home with a possible future assisted living complex. But there are also 23 residential building lots that were platted at that time. And there was a great deal of concern raised regarding what the character would be of the single family homes planned for the development. And the developers said, well, that there was an interest in developing similar types of homes to the Country Club Estates Edition number 4, which is to the west. So there were a set of covenants that were developed, and those covenants were incorporated to be enforced by the city of Salina, and we were made a party to those covenants. And there was also a requirement that could not be amended or modified without the approval of the governing body. And in those covenants, there is a limitation that says residences may include a private garage, which must be attached to the residence for not more than 3 cars. And so, as zoning administrator, I received a copy of a building permit application to construct a detached garage on this property, which is a corner lot at the northwest corner of Eastmore Drive and Deborah Drive. And as zoning administrator, I informed the block cleaners that even though it appeared that the proposed garage would conform with the size limits and setback requirements in the zoning ordinance, the staff could not issue a building permit because it would violate the protective covenants in the Holiday Resort Edition. So as you are aware, there are a number of residential subdivisions around the community where it's legal to construct a detached garage. And we have rules for detached garages in the zoning ordinance. But in this particular subdivision, only attached garages are allowed, and those covenants are enforced by the city. So we've explained that there was an effort made to circulate a legal document to be signed by a majority of property owners in the subdivision to terminate the covenants and eliminate the restriction that prevented detached garages. That effort was assisted by city staff by having a signing opportunity on Thursday evening, August 27th, and 10 people came in and signed the document. Additional signatures were obtained, and then there were signatures that were withdrawn by 2 property owners. So at the October 26th, 2020 City Commission meeting, the City Commission approved a motion accepting the termination document and also accepting the withdrawals by the 2 property owners. And they made a determination that there were insufficient signatures on the termination document to terminate the covenants, and they denied the block cleaner's request that the covenants be terminated. So the effect of that action was to leave the prohibition on detached garages in place. So no building permit could be issued for a detached garage. Then Mr. Locklear proposed attaching a garage to the west side of his house that would face and have driveway access from Deborah Drive. We do not have a building permit application for that garage. We do not have a specific site plan. What we put in the packet was a representation prepared by staff to try to depict for you what that would look like, how it would relate to the property. When that proposal was put forward, staff, myself as zoning administrator, determined that this would constitute a separate garage or a second garage, and that approval of a building permit would be contrary to both the zoning ordinance, which limits residential lots to a single attached garage, and the protective covenants, which also limit properties to one garage, which must be attached. My interpretation is that because the proposed garage is physically separate from the existing garage on the north side of the house, it would be a second attached garage and not a garage addition. And since this lot is limited to having only a single attached garage, my position is that in order for this to be a garage addition, creating a single 3-car attached garage, an additional bay would have to be added to the existing 2-car garage. In other words, the addition must be contiguous with the existing garage structure. Constructing it in a separate location with a separate driveway on a separate street makes it a second garage. That is the zoning administrator's interpretation. Mr. Blocklinger contends that I have erred in my interpretation and application of the zoning ordinance, and that he is proposing to construct a 3-car garage that is allowed under the zoning ordinance and under the protective covenants. He contends that the fact that the proposed garage bay is physically separate from the other 2 garages does not make it a separate or second garage. And he's asking the board this afternoon to overrule the zoning administrator's interpretation. Mr. Blocklinger has provided photographs of other corner lot locations where building permits have been issued for separate facing garages in the past. And so you should find some photographs taken around the community of similar situations. And so his point is that other properties have had this approved in the community, and he thinks he should also. So one of the things that's very important to understand the zoning administrator's interpretation is to understand the legislative history on detached and attached garages. We have an ordinance that dates back to 1977. In 1997, city staff received a number of complaints from property owners complaining about garages that were too large, too tall, or too commercial looking. Around that time, there was also a proposal to construct a 40 by 60 detached garage on a lot adjoining the home at Magnolia Road and Huntington Road. In that case, surrounding property owners expressed concern about the proposed location, size, and appearance of that garage, and also concern about potential uses. So what occurred was that there was a zoning text amendment initiated by the Planning Commission, and that set a size limit of 770 square feet. And then 24 by 32 is the standard size. And then in agricultural districts and residential suburban districts, you could have a garage up to 1,200 square feet. There was a height limit set on garages and a compatibility requirement. And so the purpose of that was to limit garage sizes, to keep residential areas looking residential by not allowing garages that were taller than or out of scale with the house they serve. And so there was also concern about garages being converted to business use. So as you are well familiar as a board, there is a safety valve provision in that ordinance. And property owners who believe the size limitation is too restrictive and they want to construct a larger or taller garage they can apply for a maximum garage size variance to the Board of Zoning Appeals. Adjacent property owners are notified and a public hearing is held. At the hearing, the homeowner has an opportunity to explain the hardship that would result if they couldn't have a larger garage. Neighbors have an opportunity to review the plans, provide their comments in favor or in opposition to the variance request. And so the idea here was that rather than having staff and others hear after the fact complaints about a garage that was built, the variance process allows neighbors to know what's getting built ahead of time and to comment on that. And so in the 22 years since that size limit went into effect, the board has reviewed numerous garage size variance applications, as many of you board members have personally heard, and you have approved about 75 to 80% of those requests. So this seems to work reasonably well since neighbors are given an opportunity to review and make comments on the garage before it's built. There was one additional text amendment that was done in 2004. That was also the result of some Board of Zoning Appeals cases where we had property owners who applied to build an oversized garage. Those applications were denied by this board, and then they tried to come up with a method to create a breezeway or some artificial connection, and then they ended up building garages of the same size that dwarfed the house but didn't require variance because it was deemed to be an attached garage. And so what was proposed by the Planning Commission in 2004 was to limit properties to a single attached garage, to require that the attached garages share a common wall with the home they're attached to, and to have a size limit on garages that they can't be larger than the house that they serve. So that was adopted or recommended for approval in 2005, and there was an ordinance adopted by this City Commission in 2005, and it was at this point in 2005 that were attached garages were identified and classified as accessory buildings, and residential properties were limited to one attached garage. So staff has gone through and reviewed all the photographs and examples, the permits, the approvals, the reviews of all of the examples provided by the applicant, Mr. Blocklinger, and only one, which was issued admittedly in error by a residential building inspector at 2224 Sunset Ridge Drive. All the other ones predate the adoption of the 2005 amendment. So they were built before the limitation on having a single attached garage was adopted. And so in interpreting and applying provisions of the zoning ordinance, the zoning administrator is first to look at the plain meaning of the language in the ordinance, and then secondly at the intent. It is a widely accepted rule of legislation drafting and interpretation that the term a or an are singular and are synonymous with the term one. It's also clear that in adding the section in 2005 to the accessory use regulations, that the City Commission intended to limit residential properties to one attached garage in addition to one detached garage and one storage shed. So the zoning administrator interpreted Mr. Blocklinger's proposal to be construction of an attached garage that was, first of all, physically separate from the existing attached garage. Second, was on the opposite side of the house from the existing attached garage. And three, had a separate driveway and separate street access from the existing attached garage. These factors taken together resulted in the zoning administrator determining that the structure in question is a second attached garage, and the holiday resort covenants and the city zoning ordinance prohibit that. Therefore, a building permit cannot be issued for the attached garage as proposed. So that is the zoning administrator's position. The zoning administrator's provision, what interpretation is that yes, there are garages on corner lots. I personally worked on the garage proposal at 1515 East Ellsworth, and that application came before the Board of Zoning Appeals. But at the time that was done, there was no limitation on the number of attached garages. Since 2005, there has been a limitation to having a single attached garage. So your alternatives tonight, after hearing all evidence and all comments, is you could make a finding that the proposed garage is physically separate from the existing attached garage, and therefore the zoning administrator did not err when he determined that it would be a second attached garage. You could make a finding that the proposed garage is an addition to the applicant's existing two-car garage, constituting a three-car garage, and that the zoning administrator erred when he determined the addition in question to be a second attached garage. You could postpone consideration of this appeal if you feel additional information is needed from the staff or the applicant to reach a decision. I would note that any decision that you would make would be communicated to the applicant in writing, and staff and the city attorney are available if needed to assist the board in making any findings and conclusions in support of its decision. So Dustin, you've kind of been static there on the images. Do you have any of the photographs of the garages that were provided by the applicant? So those are photographs of the applicant's property. So maybe we could rotate those.
Yeah.
This is a property on Ricky Circle. And so it is a property, actually both driveways are on Ricky Circle, but Ricky Circle is a loop street. And it has a garage facing one direction at one corner of the house and a garage facing a different direction with a separate driveway. That was built in the early 90s. We have a garage at 1515 East Ellsworth that has a garage facing Courtney and a garage facing Ellsworth. That particular case went before the Board of Zoning Appeals. That was done in 1990s, and again before the current provisions in the ordinance went into effect. The same with 753 Mound View, which has a single driveway, but has two, I would consider that to be two separate attached garages. There's an example in the Fox Run edition. We couldn't identify the address.
Number 6.
What's that?
It's number 6.
Number 6 what?
Fox Run.
Well, there's a Fox Run edition, but we don't have a street address.
I'm telling you, it's number 6.
I'm not sure that's a good example of a, I would probably, that is closer to being a 3-car attached garage than being two separate garages. We also have 2360 River Trail, which is at the corner of River Trail Road and Magnolia. That has a garage facing River Trail Road and a separate garage door facing Magnolia, but no separate driveway because driveways aren't allowed on Magnolia. And then we have 2214 Sunset Ridge Drive, which was built in 2009. And that building permit, which has a separate driveway and a garage underneath. Can't tell whether those garages occupy the same footprint, but that building permit was not referred to or reviewed by the zoning administrator and was issued in error by a residential building inspector. So that is an example of a permit that was issued that should not have been in 2009. And then there's another example from Stone Lake, which I would consider to be a single attached garage. So with that, we've outlined for you what the appeals process is. I've done my best to explain how I reached my determination that this is a second attached garage. The only other thing I would note before turning it back to the board is that we've received a number of comments from neighboring property owners asking how a garage attached to a porch can be an attached garage. And I explained to them, and I would explain to the board that in order to be considered a attached garage, the attached garage has to share a common wall with the house. It can't be attached to a porch or breezeway or anything else. So how a garage attached to the west side of the house would actually be located and built, staff is unable to answer that question. The question that we can answer is, can you attach a garage to a porch and call it attached? The answer to that is no. So I would pause to see if there's any questions from the board about the staff report, the zoning administrator's interpretation, or any of the items attached.
So questions for staff from the board? Okay. If there's no questions for staff, then we will go to comments by the applicant. And again, if you could please state your name and address.
Hi, Brad and Chrissy Blocklinger, 142 Southeast Moore. So it looks like an interpretation issue in my eyes, that it said it's a private garage. I'm not sure when you have a two-car attached garage and someone attaches a third stall to it, and that existing exterior wall stays intact, how that is not two private garages. You walk from the house into your two-car garage, but yet you have to walk through a walk-through door from two-car garage to the third stall. That to me is two private garages, which is across the street directly from me. And he's been issues about this whole process, but yet it's okay for him to do it. Also, the pictures that I looked at, or that was shown just now, none of them look unappealing to me. I mean, they're just garages. None of them are big buildings that are taller than the house or out of sorts or anything. And that's all mine would do. It would be shorter than the roof of the existing house. And on October 28th, when me and Mr. Andrews were emailing back and forth with my request, I sent him a sketch of my garage proposal. It somehow got lost in the mix.
Can you go back to our house so we can see it on there?
I don't know if that'll get close enough.
I know, but I was.
So you really can't see it. So at the far south end, before the porch starts, is where the garage would be. So that part of that deck would be made into a little room, an 8 by 12 or whatever the size would allow. As far as it'd come out the same distance as the existing deck or porch, whatever you want to call it there. And then, so that would come out of our house into this room. And then we could walk out of that room onto the deck and also into the garage. So it would have 2 doors into it. So that, and then it would attach to the existing west side of the house. So that picture there is incorrect. It wouldn't be attached to the porch. So it would come out to the west, the garage would. So the garage door is actually not facing Deborah. So any of the neighbors looking at this property would not be able to look directly into the garage door or into the garage itself, if that's some of their complaints about whatever. So the garage would come out to the west, and from the garage, it would come out and then curve back towards Deborah, if that makes sense to everyone.
Yeah, pretty much like that. So we're going to remove part of that deck, put on an additional room to our house. So that way the garage is actually attached to our house, and the opening, like you have it, will come into our backyard. It's just the driveway that will be attached to Deborah. It'll be curved from Deborah.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
That's looking
closer. It looks more like it, but yeah, the garage would actually attach to our house with a door connecting it.
Right. And the reason we have to build that room is that's our bathroom, and along that wall is a tub and our master vanity. So there's no way to put a door right there. So we have to come out of our bedroom, which we do now, to walk onto the deck. Only we'll walk into a room, and then can go out on the deck or out in the yard or into the existing garage or proposed garage. And the one on Sunset. So when I applied for this detached garage that ultimately got turned down because I tried to do away with the covenant instead of appealing it to just build a garage. That was my error. I should have tried to just get the detached garage amended into this covenant, because I had way better acceptance to that than trying to do away with the covenant altogether. That was under the advice of, Mr. Andrews told me that the city really didn't want to deal with this covenant. And so they would probably be more accepting if they could kind of wash their hands, so to speak, of the covenant, so they wouldn't have to mandate it anymore. But that's neither here nor there, I guess, at this point. But there was in this covenant, there's a house that you're only allowed to have a 3-car garage. A 4th one was added on. Well, that was also under error, but it got added anyway. This one on Sunset, this was an error on somebody, but it got added anyway. So stuff can be overlooked at times when it's convenient, I guess, because it was the inspector that messed up. Well, that's not fair. I mean, we own this property. We should be allowed to build on it what we want, I guess, so to speak, and still conform to the city codes as far as under the size. We have a big enough backyard that this would be allowed and everything. The newer house on Shoreline, I know that's a single driveway, I guess, so to speak, but that's 2 totally different garages. Them may be attached, if you want to look at it like that, at the face, but that's one garage and a second garage, just because the doors are in the vicinity of one another.
Again, a matter of
and that's just an interpretation issue again. So again, none of these garages that I've seen is unappealing to me. And they all conform to the size, as would ours. We would site it to match the siding of the house. You know, there's not going to be a tin building or anything that would look out of sorts. We would make it look like it was originally built as much as possible. And I guess, does anybody have any questions about any of that for me or us?
So any questions for the applicants? So Justin, can you go back to the photo showing their lot, and then can you take that out so we can see the entire Holiday Resort edition? So can you highlight what exactly is part of the Holiday Resort edition that has the covenants in place?
Dean can correct me, but I believe it is actual Holiday Resort, which is the kind of star-shaped building that I have my cursor on, and the potential development that's undeveloped now, where you have the detention pond, and then the houses along Eastmore. And if Dean can add in anything, that's great.
Okay.
You want to take your white arrow, Dustin? Do you have your white arrow?
Yeah.
Is that your white arrow? Can you put it on the back of the lots facing Eastmore?
Yes.
Can you move the white arrow?
Yeah, it's just really slow and delayed, but yeah.
Okay, so starting at the bottom, there's two houses on Deborah Drive, on the south side of Deborah Drive, and you start on that west property line of the second house, and you go straight up the back of the common lot line between Eastmore and Presley, and all the way up to Country Club Road, and that constitutes the Holiday Resort edition. We also have a plat map, Dustin, that's in our packet that you could display on the screen that also depicts that. That is the plat of the Holiday Resort edition right there.
Okay. So question then for the applicant, Brad, you talked about that there was a property that was by you that had.
Yes, that would be clear at the other end of Eastmore, at the very beginning of Eastmore and Argonne. It's lot number one. Lot number one, maybe.
Yep.
Yeah, one more across the street there. To the north.
Nope.
There you go.
Mm-hmm.
That one had a 3-car garage originally, and then a 4th stall was added. And that, I'm fine with it. It got approved in error, I guess, is according to Mr. Andrews, or it slipped by the city somehow again.
It did not slip by the city. It was approved by the Salina City Commission, and it was, according to the city attorney, it was done in error, but it was considered to be okay at the time, and it went before the city commission, was voted on, and it's in the minutes.
Okay.
But again, it's against our covenants. So
it's against the covenants. The city commission approved it as a modification for a single lot, and the city attorney said that was the incorrect approach.
Right. So either way, it was approved in error, I guess, however.
Okay. So currently the covenants for the Holiday Resort I'll ask Mr. Andrews. So the covenants allow one attached garage with up to 3 ports?
With up it allows a single attached garage with up to 3 stalls.
With up to 3 stalls. Okay. So I guess my question then going back to Brad and Chrissy's, Dustin, if you can go back to their lot.
The covenant states just like the zoning, because I believe the covenant is stated exactly how the zoning administration has it. So however it's worded, I think the covenant just copied it. So
okay.
if it was allowed through the zoning, the covenant really, it couldn't have an issue with it either.
Okay. So my question to you then would be, is instead of adding the additional space to the southwest of the house, what's stopping you from adding it to the northwest corner to the backside of the existing garage and then taking it out from there where it actually attaches to the current garage?
There's a kitchen. My garage doesn't go the whole length. It stops at a laundry room and kitchen and then the backyard.
So that's on that northwest or the northwest corner of the house then?
Correct.
Gotcha.
Yeah, my kitchen's right there in the northwest corner.
Okay.
And when we purchased the house, we were told that there's no HOA, no covenants, no anything. And it's even marked in our disclosure that there's not anything. So that's why we're here now.
Okay. Anybody else have questions for staff or applicants? If not, then...
This is Madison.
Go ahead, Madison.
And I'm just still trying to get the hardship for what the applicant is asking for.
Well, we have to clarify that a lot of this discussion that we're having right now is if we're talking about some form of variance, but we're not talking about a variance at this point in time. We're talking about whether the zoning administrator is correctly characterizing this as a second attached garage or whether it's a single 3-car garage. And so I have outlined that because it's physically separate from the existing attached garage, it has a separate driveway and it faces a separate street, that resulted in me determining it to be a second attached garage. So the real question is not about the hardship. The question is about whether the structure that's being discussed is essentially creating a 3-car attached garage or it's creating a second 1-car attached garage.
So is this not a variance meeting also? Or maybe it's appeal or whatever the correct wordage is, along with this determination or the interpretation of it, I guess? Is this not all the same meeting?
There was no purpose or prospect for applying for a variance to have a second attached garage because the covenants limit properties to a attached garage and attached garage with accommodating up to 3 cars. The question is whether this is an attached garage that happens to be in 2 different locations or whether it's 2 separate attached garages. That is the question.
Okay. I
guess the examples that have been cited of other residential properties in Salina that have 2 attached garages were built before the 2005 amendment that limited residential properties to a single attached garage. So we're not talking apples to apples comparisons.
Except for Sunset Ridge was not.
Except for Sunset Ridge, which I'm not positive that garage isn't underneath the other garage, but I'd have to pull more detailed plans than what I had.
So can we, if there's no other questions for applicant and staff, then comments by interested citizens?
I would call your attention, if they're no longer with us in the meeting, I would call your attention to, there was written correspondence in your packets from property owner on Presley Drive, which is to the west or rear of this property. And then this afternoon, each of you board members should have received a letter from a property owner that owns property across the street. The case of Presley Drive, those owners are outside Holiday Resort. The correspondence you received this afternoon was from another property owner in the addition. And I also received a phone call from a Holiday Resort property owner who could not attend the meeting, but indicated to me that they were supportive of the zoning administrator's interpretation and hoped it would be upheld.
Okay. Dustin, do you have anybody that's raised their hand?
Ken Creer is raising his hand, Dustin.
Okay. If you would unmute yourself, Ken, then you can speak.
Are you able to unmute?
Okay, finally got unmuted. Can you hear me now?
Yep. Can you state name and address, please?
Yes, I am Ken Creer. I live at 2730 Deborah. I live exactly on the south side of the area that they're proposing to put the garage. I face their house. First thing I would like to mention is when you buy a house in this particular neighborhood, when you sign all the papers, there is a covenant that's in there. Most people choose not to read all that information because there's such big packets when you buy a house. So the covenants was there. It just didn't happen to get read. They didn't catch it, and neither did the realtor, which does not make the neighborhood's fault. We are opposing that because of the size of the garage. It's a separate, excuse me, it's a separate garage, and the city itself says they do not allow this since 2005. I don't know why we're even getting to this. It was proposed one other time before the city commissioners, and they didn't have enough signatures to do it. The neighborhood in general don't want it because we don't want to change the property values of the house. If you look at my house, he's using me as an example. I did build a third car garage. I re-bricked the whole front of my house so that if you look at it, there's no way you can tell that my house wasn't original that way. So the whole neighborhood in general is just asking that if we have this covenant, why is it not being enforced? Even the city commented since 2005, they do not allow this. So I don't know why this issue keeps coming up. That's our opinion. We just do not desire to have that because he's going to have maybe a 5-car garage. We're not sure that how big that third attachment or that other attachment is. No one has given us any numbers on that. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, that is incorrect. We are going to have a 1-car attached garage attached to our house. The siding will match. It will be consistent. That has been stated. I think neighbors think that we're going to build some type of Morton building shop, and that's not the case. It will match our house. So it will in fact look like it was original as well. And Mr. Creer is the one who told us when we moved in, it's better to go ahead and build the garage. It's better to ask for forgiveness than permission. And we have a witness to that. But that's neither here nor there. Our garage will match our house perfectly, and it will be attached.
3 cars.
And it will only total 3 cars, as in what the covenant states.
Okay.
Yes, I did make that comment. I guess you got to be careful that you can't joke anymore because people accept everything. Again, what is going to be, are you talking a 12 by 12, 12 by 24, 24 by 30 attachment? There are no numbers, see? So how big do you classify a one-car garage?
As to what the city zoning states what a one-car garage can be.
Which is what?
Well, we have to get that permission from Mr. Andrew.
Okay. Anybody else for citizens? Questions from the board?
We do have one person, Mr. Chair.
There's a Rick Nicholson there, Dustin.
Yep. Go ahead and unmute yourself, Rick.
I was unclear on the two-car garage. It seemed like we're asking for two attached garages. I didn't think that was legal in Salina. And all the neighborhood is concerned with, like having a lot of cars parked around the neighborhood and a garage starting up, and nobody knows for sure how big this garage is going to be. And it's a concern.
Rick, can you state what your address is, please?
143 South Presley.
Okay.
My property adjoins the property in question.
Again, it's just the one-car attached garage.
I'd like to know how big the garage is. I mean,
hold on.
And why can you have two attached garages on a house and two driveways? I don't understand that. I mean, it would seem to me like we're allowing two separate attached garages to a house, which I don't think is up to code, two driveways, which I don't think is really up to code either. I'm not a building inspector, but I've never really seen that. And like a lot of the other neighbors are just kind of looking out for the neighborhood, trying to keep it nice and protect the property values. And I don't like what I'm seeing here. And that's where I'm coming from.
Okay, thank you.
We're just beating the same issue over and over, so that really wasn't relevant. I asked several times to Mr. Andrews when I first emailed Dean about the garage. I said, "What is the largest size for a single car garage allowed?" And I never did get a size answer from him. He said my existing garage is a 20 by 22, and it is very small. We can fit our new truck and our new car in it, and that's about it. So I don't know how big we can go. I never did get an answer. I was proposing a 16 by 24, so it's 2 foot longer than my attached garage, and just widen, a little wider. It's nothing big that we could fit cars in or anything like that. Just another single garage, if that's allowed. So like I said, I proposed this, asked Dean about a size, and maybe he didn't know the answer because it was, too many variables yet. But obviously, if it's a 20 by 22, that's considered a 2-car garage, so it can't be that big, obviously. So I would say like a 16 by 20, 24. I don't know, whatever the city will allow me to build, as far as that goes.
Okay. And right now, the question is not the size of a garage, because at this point, the entire question is, can they attach to the house how they're wanting to? Does that become a separate garage, or does that still part of an attached garage? So regardless of the size right now, the whole question is whether it becomes a separate attached garage, or if it is still a attached garage to what is currently there. That is what we're looking at this point in time. That is what the appeal process is, not on the size of it at all. So,
I don't know. Whatever the city will allow me to build, as far as that goes.
Okay. And right now, the question is not the size of a garage, because at this point, the entire question is, can they attach to the house how they're wanting to? Does that become a separate attached garage, or if it is still a attached garage to what is currently there? That is what we're looking at this point in time. That is what the appeal process is, not on the size of it at all. So Thank you for your comments on that. If there's no other interested citizens, I would put it back to discussion for the board.
Dustin, you may want to check with Greta Frank. I don't know how, if she's listening in or how to reach out to her, but I think she might be interested in this case as well.
Yeah, Greta, if you need to speak, you can unmute yourself, or you can raise your hand, and we can have you speak. Or if there's anybody else in addition to Greta that would like to speak, let us know. There's an option to raise your hand in Zoom, or if you wave, the camera will pick up on it if you're on a video.
Greta's not on video, but she's showing up there as being a participant.
Right. She's currently muted. I've tried to unmute her, but she has to unmute herself from her end if she wants to speak.
So do we have anybody else at this point, Dustin, that has their hand raised?
Nobody else.
Okay, so let's give somebody about another 30 seconds to give them the opportunity to respond. And if not, then we'll move to discussions within the board.
I guess I have just one last thing. I don't know, because like just this one, we didn't drive the entire town to take pictures. So I don't know if there are more houses like this that have, multiple multiple garages with multiple driveways. I'm sure we could definitely find more, but like the Sunset Ridge one was done after 2005. So after the cutoff. So I guess my question is also, where's the cutoff? How do you allow it for one and not for another?
Okay, appreciate your comment. So at this point, Dustin, nobody else?
Nobody else.
Okay, so I'm going to take it back to the board. Comments from the board? Where I'm at on this then, I mean, if I look at this, just from looking at the drawings from what was there, even if the first drawing was not correct and then we moved it over to it, if we go back to kind of what the main questions are is what the applicant is proposing, is that a separate garage or is it a continuation of the existing garage? And when I look at the outline of the house, to me, and a continuation of the existing garage would be coming off of the northwest corner of that house, not on the southwest corner of the house. At that point, to me, it becomes a separate garage unless you were able to add it to the north side of the garage or to the west of the existing. Then it would be a continuation and you could add a third part. He can't because of the property. He can't because of the existing part of it. So what is proposed to me is a separate garage. It's not it's not part of the existing garage since it's on the opposite side of the house. So for me, I don't see it. I understand that the covenants are in place. You try to get those overturned, where you just try to get them overturned overall. Maybe the better option would have been to try to overturn the covenants so that you could have a detached garage to it. You may have been able to go better. That's still not part of what we're hearing. At this point, it is still, does this become a second garage or is it still part of the first garage? My feeling is it's a second garage. Comments? Thoughts from any of the other board? Okay. Does somebody want to make a motion on this application?
I move that the board find that the proposed garage is physically separate from the existing attached garage and that the zoning administrator did not make an error in his determination.
Okay. Do we have a second?
I'll second that motion.
Okay, so we have a motion that the zoning administrator did not make an error for the second garage, and this is for application AP20-1. So we have motion and seconded. Can we have a roll call?
Mr. Dorsweiler,
Aye.
Mr. Sharp,
Aye.
Mr. Rada,
Aye.
Ms. Miles,
Aye.
Mr. Olson.
Aye.
Okay, so the board has taken action that upheld the zoning administrator's interpretation that the proposed construction would be a second attached garage. So that passed by a motion of 5-0. And that would bring us to item 3.4.
So is this, so am I able to file an appeal to this verdict? Or
the handout that I sent out, which is attached to the application page, says that Board of Zoning Appeal decisions is final local action on an appeal. Any person dissatisfied with the Board of Zoning Appeals decision may bring an action within 30 days in the District Court of Saline County to determine the reasonableness of the board's decision.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. So we are now on to application number V20-8, filed by Luminous Neon on behalf of Salina Family Healthcare Center. First is there a representative from the applicant or the applicant or the representative?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so we have the applicant available. So summary presentation by staff, please.
That'll be me. I'm trying to get some things loaded up here real quick and then we'll get going.
Hey guys, I'm gonna have to go audio only because my computer is about at 15% left, so I'm gonna be in here, but it's just gonna be audio only.
And,
all right.
I just have to say, I have a conflict of interest on this, so I'm not going to be saying anything. So, just for you guys' information.
And who was that?
That Mr. Rada?
No, that's Mr. Kraft.
Okay. Mr. Kraft is not going to participate in this item, our student representative. So, thank you, Benjamin.
So the property in question, or where we have the variance request for this particular item, is the former YWCA, and it's about a block north of Crawford behind the Maori Clinic and the Elmore Center. So just to give you some context of where we are, we're to the north of Central High, Maori Clinic, and the Elmore Center. And it's kind of a strange zoning lot that has an irregular shape to it. And this particular property was developed in 1970 and featured a building that had 12,820 square feet of recreational space plus another 5,800 square feet of indoor pool area. And that property, when it was originally constructed, was Zone C for apartment house district. And when the city of Salina went through the comprehensive rezoning in 1977, that property was rezoned to C1 restricted business. In 1987, the BZA approved a lot coverage variance of 5% from 30%, which is the maximum in the C1 district, to 35 to allow a new addition for the shelter of the building. And since that time, there have been a number of variances that have taken place for different additions and modifications to the building. The property was closed as the YWCA in the early 2000s and was acquired in 2008 for the Salina Family Healthcare Center operations that are currently active on the site today. So I mentioned there have been a number of lot coverage variances and other kinds of setback variances on the site because of its unique nature in terms of its shape. The most recent variance that we have is from July of 2014, in which a sign size variance on the south side of the building, which is where my cursor is currently showing, was approved. And it was approved for an 88 square foot sign was approved, and that exceeded the maximum 32 square feet that we have in the C1 district. And the Board of Zoning Appeals approved it, finding that the site is unique as it is a C1 zone property that occupies 1.35 acres, and that as a health clinic is very intense, especially compared to other C1 zone properties, and that the 32 square foot sign limitation does not really fit the size of the building site or the historic use of the property. And the clinic is located a block off of Crawford Street and cannot be identified from there. The board also went on to state that the approval of the clinic's request would not set a bad precedent or undermine the purpose of the C1 sign regulations, because the proposed signage is proportional to the length and height of the building, with it having a larger mass, and which far exceeds the norm that we normally see in the C1 district. So we do have a number of variances, with the most recent being a sign size variance. That brings us to date in the nature of this particular request. And what we have is an existing ground sign, a monument sign, that is located in the southwest corner of the property. And there is currently a 4x8 sign, which is a 32 square foot sign. And the applicant is looking to replace that with a modified 32 square foot sign, but the modified sign would be wider and shorter. So it'd be a 2x16 instead of a 4x8. Now, the issue with the proposed sign is that although it does still adhere to the size maximums of 32 square feet, the issue is that it encroaches into the required 10-foot setback. And so here is a site plan that shows kind of the whole site and the property lines for the site. And here's a zoomed in version of that photograph or that site plan that shows the existing sign, which is the green line that you see in relation to the proposed sign, and the existing property lines, which are red, and the required 10-foot setback, which is in blue. And what you see is, and you also have, I should say, that the gray lines that are around the signs here, that is the boundaries of an existing landscape planter bed that the current existing sign is located in. So the gray lines are that stone planter bed that you see. And so what you'll find when you zoom in on this, and I'll do that for you here, is that the existing sign barely fits in inside the 10-foot setbacks along that corner for both Prescott and Guernsey, and that any additional length to the sign is going to encroach into either the Prescott setback or the Guernsey setback. And what the applicant is proposing to do is center the sign, the proposed sign, so that it's more centered on the landscape island, which as a result encroaches into the 10-foot setback along Guernsey by about 5 feet. So that's the nature of our current situation and the request that's being made by the applicant. Now, looking at the zoning in the area, the health clinic site is C1, which is surrounded by R to the west and to the north. And then you have the Elmore Center and Maori Clinic, which the west wing of the Maori Clinic is PC3, while the main bulk of the clinic is C1, and the Elmore Center is all C3 commercial. So the applicant, when we look at the uniqueness of the property, they say that the widest a sign can be within the existing landscape planter bed while maintaining the 10-foot setback along Guernsey is 8 feet, which is what we currently have with the existing sign. And that if the sign is installed offset in the planter, and the existing one is, which skews it to the south, and that's the only way to widen the sign is to continue to skew it to the south, but then you're running in against the setback along Prescott. So it would require, in order to widen the sign, it would require a setback into the 10-foot setback requirement on the north side of the sign. Staff would agree that the existing sign is currently skewed towards the south edge, and you can see that with the existing sign, how the existing sign is not centered in the landscape island, but rather it's skewed more towards Prescott. And you can also see that even more clear on the site plan here. Staff would point out that the Guernsey Drive and Prescott Avenue intersection creates a unique arrowhead-shaped land area that is impacted by front yard setbacks on both the north and south sides. So you can see how, you can even see probably better on the larger scale one, so I'll pull that up. But you can see how the property along the intersection where Guernsey and Prescott intersect really pinches in and creates kind of an arrowhead shaped land area, which is really unique. And that pinching in really limits how wide a sign could be in this landscape area. Looking at the adverse effects on the neighbors, the applicant states that they do not feel that the proposed ground sign will adversely affect the adjacent property owners or residents to the north on Guernsey Drive. The applicant is proposing to install a wider identification sign with a lower profile, which will be less intrusive than the existing 4x8 sign that is also internally illuminated. The new proposed sign will have a lower profile, being only 2 feet tall, and will be non-illuminated, which would reduce the impact that it would have on the neighbors. Staff would note that the proposed sign is the exact same square footage and same size as the existing ground sign, and that with its lower profile and being non-illuminated, that it would not have a greater impact on the neighborhood in relation to the existing sign that's currently there. The staff would also point out that the proposed sign would still remain within the confines and boundaries of the existing landscaping bed and would be more centered there, making it potentially more visibly attractive, and would still be set back 21 feet from Guernsey and would not impede visibility any more than the existing landscaping that's currently in the landscape planter bed. Looking at unnecessary hardship, the applicant states that the wider sign will clearly identify the healthcare center from both streets to the west side of the building. The patients are the healthcare center's top priority, and they want to be able to make it easy and stress-free, and in order for patrons to find the clinic. With the current pandemic and COVID-19 testing, the need for clear identification is amplified. The requested identification sign is wider in hopes that it can be seen from both streets on the west side, and that the wider sign is not allowed in this area due to the property lines being so inset at the corner where it pinches in, and that the only alternative is to move the sign back further to the east. This would mean the removal of the current plant bed, landscape area, and building a new one even further away from the corner they're trying to identify. This would be costly for the customer. It would not gain them more visibility at the corner. If they were allowed to remain in the flower bed with the new sign, with a wider sign, this would be the goal of the healthcare center. Staff believes that not granting the proposed sign setback variance will create an unnecessary hardship on the applicant by prohibiting a ground sign from being erected in a more centered location within the existing landscape planter. Staff agrees that it is impossible to erect a ground sign that is centered within the existing landscape planter and still maintain the prescribed 10-foot setback. The only way a sign could be centered within the landscape planter is if the entire landscape planter were removed and rebuilt at a location further east, which would result in unnecessary cost and expense, as well as reduced sign visibility. In looking at the effects on the public health, safety, and welfare, the applicant states the proposed sign setback variance will not adversely affect the health, safety, morals, order, or convenience of the general public, as the proposed sign encroachment will be unobtrusive. The proposed identification sign will more clearly direct patients to the healthcare center. Staff agrees that the proposed encroachment will be unobtrusive. The portion of the proposed ground sign that will encroach into the 10-foot setback area will only be 2 feet tall and will be wholly contained within the existing landscape planter. The proposed sign extension will be no more obtrusive than the existing landscape plantings within the landscape planter, and the proposed ground sign will still be set back 21 feet from Guernsey Drive and will not obstruct visibility or be a distraction to drivers. In looking at the conformity and general spirit and intent of the zoning ordinance, the C1 district is intended to primarily accommodate business and professional office development. It is designed and intended to serve as a buffer or transition zone between residential areas and more intense commercial areas. Therefore, the C1 district has more restrictive building height limits, setback requirements, lot coverage, and sign limitations than other commercial zoning districts. The purpose for limiting and restricting signs in the C1 district is to minimize the visual impact on the neighboring properties and maintain a smaller scale of development. In this case, the regulations of the signs, as we mentioned in our earlier report, affect the First Amendment and equal right protection issues and need to be well thought out and are important to treat in similar situated properties equally and evenly handed. And the applicant states that granting the variance will not be opposed to the general intent of the zoning ordinance. Currently, this property is allowed to have a ground sign. However, the applicant feels that a wider ground sign will be seen more clearly from the corner of East Prescott and from Guernsey Drive. The applicant argues that the proposed ground sign would only encroach into the setback on the north side, as the 10-foot setback would be maintained on the south along Prescott. Even if the proposed ground sign is allowed to encroach 5 feet into the 10-foot setback along Guernsey Drive, the sign would still be 21 feet back from the north edge of Guernsey Drive. This is essentially the same distance the sign would be from the curb on the south side along Prescott Avenue. In the spirit of the current code, we have kept all proposed signs for variances at 32 square feet and are not asking for the sign to be installed beyond any of the current property lines in order to adhere closely to the code as possible. Staff would note that all variances are contrary to the letter of the governing zoning ordinances. The issue is whether the requested variance is contrary to the general spirit and intent of the ordinance. The intent of imposing minimum sign setback distances is to preserve visual sight lines along street frontages in order to minimize negative impacts on adjacent properties and ensure vehicle and pedestrian visibility and safety. In this case, staff would note that the unobstructive nature of the proposed ground sign encroachment will have little to no visual impact on neighboring properties and is in keeping with the general spirit and intent of the sign setback requirements. Furthermore, the C1 zoning district is probably not the most appropriate zoning designation for a facility of this size and scale, and that the existing C1 zoning has at times unduly restricted the applicant's plans for fully redeveloping this property. For that reason, staff does not believe that the clinic's request would set a bad precedent or undermine the purpose of the city sign regulations. So on the bottom of page 11, we do have a summary of staff suggested findings, which summarize what we've just gone through in the report. The alternatives that we have is the board may approve the requested sign setback variance with or without any conditions. If the requested or if the required findings of fact can be made, the board could approve a lesser variance if they don't feel that the requested variance is approvable and that they would like to see a smaller setback variance approved. The board could also postpone action on this application if the additional information is needed or required. And the board may deny the applicant's request if the required findings of fact cannot be made. Staff believes that the Guernsey Drive and Prescott Avenue intersection creates a unique land area where the proposed ground sign is located, and the proposed ground sign will have little to no adverse effects on the neighbors, as the proposed sign will have a lower profile than the existing sign and will be non-illuminating. That, in addition to that, the sign would be wholly contained within the existing landscape planter and will still have a pretty significant setback from Guernsey of 21 feet. For these reasons, staff would recommend approving this sign setback variance application as requested. And with that, we will take any questions, or we can go over any of the visuals if anybody would like to see any of those again.
So questions for staff? Okay, if there's no questions from staff, then we'll move to comments by the applicant. Please state name and address.
My name is Megan Schaefer. I'm with Luminous Neon Signs, and our address for the sign company is 1500 West Schilling Road in Salina.
Okay, thank you. So,
and are you just ready for my comments?
Yeah, any comments?
Okay. We want to give the customer what they're hoping for and what they're trying to gain: better visibility at the corner on both streets. The main reason they want to be seen a little bit better is if you're coming from that direction, you won't see any signage there until you get to the front of the building. So this corner is kind of important if you're approaching from that direction. We didn't want to try and go out of sign code. We tried to keep it at 32 square foot. But in order to avoid that reconstruction, we even scooted, if you look at the overhead, we scooted the sign back farther. They'll probably have to move the pampas grass, but we'll move the sign back farther. So we would, in fact, take less of the setback as we can, rather than putting it right in the center of it. Then we would have been asking for more setback remove, more space. So we basically moved it back as far as we could and still have it centered in that planter bed in order to take as little of that one side as we could in our proposal. So, and with it not being larger, I feel like we're not going to be a nuisance to the neighborhood or be a problem for the traffic. But we did try to adhere as best we could and still get them more visibility at that corner.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for the applicant from the board? Okay, if there's no questions, then Dustin, do we have any citizens?
I'm looking at, nobody has raised their hand yet, but we'll kind of keep an open eye here for a minute or so. if anybody would like to speak, you can either raise your hand or you could even unmute yourself and just start speaking. I think that would be acceptable as well. Okay. I don't see anybody, Mr. Chair.
All right, then discussion back to the board. Any comments or discussion? To me, this one's pretty easy. I think the biggest thing for me is because of the shape of this lot and where the sign is currently at. I think that they've done a pretty good job of making sure that it's not obtrusive, but yes, it does go over the setback, but I don't see where it's going to be an issue for a safety, which would to me be the biggest thing. It's not going to block traffic for people on either of the roads. So I think that this one would be pretty easy. We still stay within the 32 square feet. We're not trying to go larger. We're just going slightly over a setback. I think that this would be something that I would definitely be in favor of approving.
I would like to make a motion that the board approves application V-28.
I second that.
Okay, so we've had a motion and a seconded. So roll call for approval.
Steve Dortzfather, aye.
Al Sharp, aye.
I'll roll.
Richard Rada, aye.
Madison Miles, aye.
John Olson, aye. So application number V20.8 has been approved by a vote of 5-0. We thank you.
Who had the second on that? Was that Mr. Dorjweiler?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
So we now move on to item 3.5, which is application number V20-9, which is filed by Bill Swinson requesting a front yard setback variance of 21 feet from 25 feet that is required in a residential zoning district. So do we have the applicant or a representative of the applicant available?
I don't see that we have the applicant present, which is not significant at this point in time. We'll want to ensure his presence at the January meeting, but we've been working with Mr. Swenson on his situation where he had started some work without a permit and have attempted to continue working with him, and we actually received all the information to make his application complete on Friday, but after the packet had already gone out. So what we've indicated there is that our recommendation is to open the public hearing, receive any comments from the applicant or interested neighbors, and then approve a motion to continue the hearing and postpone consideration of this item to January 21 to allow the applicant additional time to submit all the items needed to bring a complete application before the board. As of Friday afternoon, I believe we have that, but we certainly had already sent the packet out before we received what we were hoping to receive. So our recommendation is to open the hearing, see if anyone wants to speak, and then we'd entertain a motion to continue this item to your January 21st meeting.
Okay, so let's open it to interested citizens.
I don't see anybody, but we'll give it a moment here.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think we have anybody.
Okay, then I would say, do we have a motion for continuation of this to our January 21st meeting?
I move that we continue the hearing and propose the consideration of application V20-9 to the January 21st, 2021 meeting.
I second that.
Okay, so we have a motion and a seconded. Roll call for approval.
Mr. Dornsweiler, Mr. Rada,
Aye.
Mr. Sharp,
Aye.
Ms. Miles,
Aye.
and Mr. Olson.
Aye.
That motion carries 5-0.
Okay, so we are now on to administrative items, and
We don't have any administrative non-hearing items for you this evening. In terms of other business, we indicated that the schedule for the Board of Zoning Appeals will probably be unchanged, will remain unchanged with our other boards and commissions. We're going to continue with our shortened schedule. So the Planning Commission would normally meet twice a month. We'll meet once a month. The Design Review Board once a month. Probably into the first half of next year. And we'll probably continue meeting by Zoom for the foreseeable future. And we had no new items. I take that back. We had one item, and Mr. Herrs, you're working on another item. Do you anticipate that item going on the January 21st agenda?
Dustin, you're muted. We couldn't hear you if you said something.
Sorry, I did. Thank you for reminding me. I said at this point, it might be a little premature to say whether it will or won't.
So for January 21st, we will meet. We'll have annual report of your 2020 activities. We'll have 2 applications that carried over from today's meeting to January. And then we had an application filed by Chick-fil-A for some setback variances associated with shade canopies that they would like to add at their restaurant on South 9th Street. So you'll have at least 3 items plus the annual report, and we're working with another applicant on a case at this point. But we will meet in January, so please put that date on your schedules. We had a few hiccups initially. Did all the board members find that Zoom was working for them pretty well this evening?
Yeah. It's all right.
You could, the audio, except for the one exception, it seemed like the audio quality was good and we could hear people and identify who was speaking. And again, we can't see Benjamin, but we do thank Benjamin Kraft, our new student youth representative, for joining us.
so I do have a question on the Zoom meetings. So since we were scheduled to start at 4 o'clock today for the meeting, are you not opening the Zoom meeting until right at 4 o'clock?
I typically will probably open it a little bit earlier than that. I just was a little behind on things today, which is why it happened basically at 4 today. Okay. But typically, I think we'd like to be able to have everybody kind of situated at least 5 minutes or so ahead of time for those that feel more comfortable with that. Just it gets you kind of anxious when you're trying to get in and like, why aren't I in? Like I'm supposed to be here. No, I get that. I was behind on some things on my end, and so that's why I didn't get here till about 4.
Correct. And the reason I'm saying is because I did try to get in a little bit earlier, mainly just to make sure that audio was going to work, video was going to work, make sure that if I was talking, you could hear me, those types of things. So I guess I would like to get in about 10 mintes early because I think 5 minutes is still probably cutting it a little bit close for most people. Sure. At least specifically for the board members, to make sure that everybody's comfortable with it. Don't know if anybody else has any opinions or thoughts on it.
I think 10 is great.
Yeah, that's good with me, John.
Okay. So if there's no other unfinished business, then we would be up to public forum. So Dustin, do we have anybody still in?
It looks like we do. Well, actually, it looks like everybody that's left is commissioners and Salina Media.
Okay. So if we do not have public forum, then I would call for motion for adjournment.
I move that we adjourn the meeting.
I'll second that.
Okay. Roll call for approval.
Mr. Dorsweiler,
Aye.
Mr. Rada,
Aye.
Mr. Sharp,
Aye.
Ms. Miles,
Aye.
Mr. Olson.
Aye.
We have a motion to adjourn that has been approved.
All right. Thank you, everybody.
All right. Have a
Good
Merry
night,
Christmas, everyone.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Christmas.
Merry Christmas.